targeted work in chapbook and broadside collections. I would only consider a story for inclusion in this collection if either 1. I found at least 3 versions, with at least one published in Britain, or 2. I found fewer references, but there was a comment that the story type was common in the United Kingdom. For instance, in Do You Know Her, there is only one 19th century version, known to me, but there are separate comments that such stories circulated in the 19th century. All the stories gathered together in this book were included on the basis of one of these 2 criteria. In a very few cases, e.g., I'm Jack the Ripper, I only found 3 sources by stepping outside the Victorian period proper. Many interesting stories were excluded by these criteria. Indeed, I have tens of entries where I have just 2 instances of a given legend, or sometimes just 1 instance of a story that I strongly suspect was a legend. For example, I found a single Staffordshire version of Corpse in the Cart for the 1800s. Thus, I was not able to include it, despite being convinced that this was a widely circulated legend. Likewise, Wrong Trousers was, I am sure, widely told. It is too good a story not to have been, but I struggled to find more than 1 British example, and I am only able to include it because FG came to the rescue with 2 other instances, one from the United States and one from New Zealand set in Australia. There are many other stories that I exclude in the end for reasons of space. I am confident that with more searching and more debate, it will be possible to publish a further collection of Victorian urban legends. In defining the legends collected here, I concentrated on narrative patterns. Was there an established narrative that appeared again and again? It was sometimes tempting to pick at story complexes. For instance, there are scores of Victorian stories that involve what might be called generosity repaid. In a society which was less meritocratic than ours, and in which there was no welfare state, charity and personal patronage mattered much more. Not surprisingly, in many Victorian stories, a loan or a gift is repaid many times over by the beneficiary, either because he is rich, something the donor did not realize, or because he becomes rich. A man going to Australia is given a loan of £25. Several years later, after making his fortune, he gives the lender £30,000. A young painter gives a beggar posing for a painting a few francs. The beggar, actually Lord Rothschild, gives him 10,000 francs. A monograph could be written here by a historian, but from the point of view of a folklorist, this complex never resolves itself into a consistent narrative. I was much more interested in stories with strong repeating narratives. The listener must judge whether I was correct to include familiar enemies or hero survives legends that are close to legend complexes. I likewise try to avoid isolated motifs. For instance, there are frequent references to trapdoors and holes in the ground in Victorian urban legends. A hole in a cellar appears in Maria Monk's description of her Montreal nunnery. Victims and newborn babies were thrown there. There were the English inns where a bed dropped its occupants down to the floor below to be killed and despoiled. There are trapdoors too in many Bluebeard-type murder stories, most famously Sweeney Todd's. This felt like a motif rather than a legend type, so while acknowledging its peculiar importance in the Victorian imagination, I did not give the trapdoor an entry of its own. Another example is the ghost's portrait. For example, ghost of nun aids wounded French soldiers in World War II. She is identified by a picture of Joan of Arc. Despite very specific motifs like this, a generic portrait ghost motif has never been created. On seeing a portrait, a man or woman realizes that they have seen a ghost, or that they are able to identify the ghost they have seen. This is a motif that appears in a number of legends. It is often present in the Vanishing Hitchhiker, but perhaps it can also be usefully classed as a legend type. There are many Victorian and Edwardian stories where the portrait is the focus, to use Gillian Bennet's phrase, the engine of the story. Spoiled for choice, I left this story to one side. What should be clear here is that classifying story complexes, story types, and story motifs is a subjective act. It is not a question of algebraic certainty. Once I had a belief story file and proof that the story had circulated orally or in print.